Good afternoon, everybody. Today we continue with the study today, and today's session is on Jesus Comes the Storm. It was taken from three different passages: Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 36, Mark chapter 6, 45 to 56, and John chapter 6, 16 to 21. I'll be basing mainly on the Matthew version, but maybe if you could just put on the Mark version and the John version, because we might be referring to some passages there. Okay, the context of this passage on Jesus comes the storm. If you read Matthew version, even the other, it was earlier what John the Baptist was beheaded. Okay, and yesterday during our discussion, we did talk that John the Baptist was actually beheaded outside, okay, not in Galilee. But the feeding of the 5,000, that was yesterday's reading, as well as today's reading on Jesus walking on water, happens in the Sea of Galilee up north. By now, we should be familiar with the geography of Israel. You have Sea of Galilee on top, then you have the River Jordan, and down south is the Dead Sea. Okay, so this is a Sea of Galilee, and okay, this is the Sea of Galilee, a very simple map. Okay, we will talk about Bethsaida, because even though the scripture in Matthew and so on, it talk about Jesus feeding the 5,000, Jesus took the disciple to that deserted place, but generally it is accepted that it was in the town near Bethsaida. Okay, in the John version of today's passage, they mention Capernaum, that the disciple gone onto the boat and they were traveling to Capernaum. But both Matthew and Mark version say that when they landed, after the miracle and so the storm and so on, they landed, they were in the place of Gennesaret. Okay, I think this is the map. Okay, we can see Bethsaida on the side. Okay, the Capernaum, and the other Gennesaret is over here. Okay, Gennesaret is here, Capernaum is here. Okay, and this one, if you look at this map, it does give you some of the things about some of the miracles that Jesus did. Generally speaking, most of Jesus' miracles happen around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, generally up north, Sea of Galilee, the people accept Jesus warmly. But down south, near Jerusalem, the people in Jerusalem, religious leaders and so on, are more hostile to Jesus. Okay. Today we talk about the miracle of Jesus, as is mentioned, is Matthew version, Mark version, and John version. I would just like to show you this short video clip, a little bit of description about Sea of Galilee.
Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake with a length from north to south of 13 miles, a maximum width of 8 miles. The lake lies 686 feet below sea level, but it is surrounded by steep cliffs and hills, creating strong swirling wind. The sea. Note that the large waves breaking on the shore in the picture below occurred under a clear sky at sunset.
Okay, so this short description says Sea of Galilee is fresh water, but because it is surrounded by steep hill, sometimes when the wind blows, it can be a very calm sea, and suddenly the large wave will break on, and you will have can be a storm. Okay, so from there we will look at the message. We look at Matthew message. We'll read the passage from Matthew where Jesus walks on the water. Okay, immediately Jesus make the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. This immediately means immediately after the miracle of feeding of the 5,000. He make the disciples get into the boat and go to the other side. Just like we mentioned, it was in Bethsaida, but Jesus wanted to go over to the other side. I think it is in the Mark and the John version, he said they were actually heading towards Capernaum. Okay, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So this is what is happening. Jesus was there. After he sent the people away, he went off to pray.
Jesus ground to the miracle. Jesus had just fed the 5,000, and the multitude would have made him king, cf. John 1:49, 18:37. Jesus sent the multitudes away. He sent the disciples across the sea in a boat. Jesus went to a mountain to pray, Lk. 6:12, 9:18, 11:1. The disciples rowed 3 or 4 miles against a strong headwind.
So what we see here is Jesus sent his disciples away. Why do you think Jesus sent them away? Just now in the little video, he talked about he was afraid that he was concerned that they might want to make him king. And the two references, John 1 and John 18. Okay, so because imagine a crowd of 5,000 male plus ladies plus children, maybe 10, 12,000 people. After observing such a great miracle, they might decide to make him king. And that's why Jesus knew it was not his time yet. So that's why he sent the disciples away. And can you imagine if the people had risen up, the more than 10,000 people came together and said, Jesus, we want you to be king. Because remember, these are Jews. And they've been waiting for the Messiah. And for 400 years of silence, they have not heard from any word from the Lord. Then came John the Baptist. And John the Baptist said, I have come to prepare the way for the Messiah. And now here comes this rabbi who did such a marvelous miracle, which is recorded in all 4 Gospels as we read yesterday. People say, yeah, yes, this must be the Messiah. And to the Jews, a Messiah is a king. So it is very likely in the people's mind, let us make him king. And with him, with Jesus, the Messiah, coming with the Messiah and King Jesus, it will usher in the kingdom of God. Okay, so that is what happened. But so Jesus said it's not the good time. So that's why he sent the disciples away. But there is also a second reason, I think, why Jesus sent them away. I think Jesus wants the disciples to be able to experience. Okay, we were saying Jesus wanted the disciples to experience the bigger miracle. In Matthew chapter 8, we read about chapter 8 of Matthew, talk about Jesus was in the boat during the storm. And when Jesus stood up, rebuked the wind and the storm is stopped. But now Jesus, who is omniscient and omnipotent, knew what was coming. And he wanted his disciples to experience a greater, another incident of facing the storm, but without Jesus with them in the boat. Can you see the difference? And so that's what they did. Jesus wanted them to do that. Okay, so now let us continue to read verse 25. By this time, the boat was quite far away, and they were struggling. Verse 25, shortly before dawn. This newer NIV said shortly before dawn, but most of the other version, the older NIV version, the New King James Version, the Revised Standard Version, and also the ESV, all put at the 4th watch. Okay, before dawn, the 4th watch, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It is a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.
Details of the miracle. In the fourth watch of the night Jesus went to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by.
Is that what you want?
The disciples feared that Jesus was a ghost. Jesus responded, "Be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid."
Kok Moi, you
Peter
got to put me
said,
side by side.
"Lord, if it is you,
You got to
command
spotlight me
to
as
come
well.
to
I'm
you
not gonna
on
see
the
a slide.
water." Jesus commanded him to come, and he began to walk on the sea.
In this passage, it said fourth watch of the night. In the Jewish calendar, a day is the first watch of the night is 6 p.m. So 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. is the first watch. 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. is the second watch. 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. is the third watch. And 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the fourth watch. So what is happening is, Jesus went up to the mountain to pray. Then later that night, there probably maybe 9, 10, 11. Okay? But he knew he could see what is in the sea, and the people, his disciples, were struggling. But why do you think Jesus waited until 3 to 6 a.m.? Some commentators said probably he went to see them at 4 a.m. So it's still quite dark. Okay, I think firstly, maybe Jesus wanted to spend time praying. But secondly, I think Jesus wanted to give some time for the disciples to think over it, to process what had happened about the miracle. And some of them might need to rest, might need to sleep, and they might need to debrief. So give them a couple of hours, spend among themselves to debrief and try to make sense of what happened in the miracle. Okay, and so it continued, and then when he walked on the water, the both Matthew and Mark versions, Matthew version say when they walked on the water, when the disciples saw somebody, came at 4 a.m., 4 a.m., very dark, somebody walked in the water and they were terrified and they cried out in fear and they said, "It's a ghost." Okay, but what is interesting, if you just turn to the Mark version. There's something interesting I discovered in the Mark version. Mark chapter 6, if you look at, starting from verse 47. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was on the mountain praying, and he was alone on land. Jesus saw the disciples straining at the oar because the wind was against them. And so shortly before dawn, or fourth watch of the night, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., he went out to them walking on the lake. Notice this. He was about to pass by them. So what was Jesus' intention? He actually wanted to teach a precious lesson to his disciples. So he was walking. He was not going to, hi, I'm coming. But he was making an intention to pass by them and wanted to check whether they knew he was. Okay, but sadly speaking, the disciples didn't recognize him, possibly because it was dark. But when they saw him walking on the water, they thought he was a ghost. And so they cried out. Okay, so this is what happened. They thought they thought he was a ghost, and then they cried out. And then in the Matthew version, the next part of the Matthew version, chapter 14 onwards, I read verse 28. Okay, this is Jesus' encounter with Peter. "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God.
But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Jesus' response to the miracle. Those who were in the boat were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled, and they came and worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God.
This passage is only recorded in Matthew. Of course, we have a whole different sermon on this. How Peter, we have to keep, instead of focusing on Jesus. I mean, Peter being who he is, very kiasu, very impulsive, and he is very adventurous. He said, oh Lord, let me come to you. And so he started stepping out of the boat and he started walking. Okay, but when the wave get bigger, instead of looking at Jesus, he looked at the wave and he started sinking. So that it can be a whole sermon on that. But what I wanted to share, what we like to look at Mark chapter 6. Let's look at verse 51. Mark chapter 6 verse 51. Okay, then he climbed into the boat with them. That's Jesus and Peter. After this incident of Peter walking on the water and then sinking because he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind instead. Okay, the wind died down and they were completely amazed. Verse 52. This was the one when I read it this morning. This verse caught my attention. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. It's only Mark who recorded this. So I was wondering, why do you think this was put in? I think this was put in because the disciples had witnessed one of the greatest miracle of the feeding 5,000 that was recorded in all the 4 passages. So they saw, but they still could not understand. They didn't understand, meaning they don't get the full implication of it. They probably just thought that Jesus is somebody great. He could do miracle. He could satisfy their physical need. There's the multiplication of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He was able to provide for them. But when there was a storm, and they saw this dark figure coming by, and as though wanted to walk past them, instead of recognizing and understanding that this is their Lord, and if he can multiply the food, if he has authority over our physical need, if he can be my provider, he can also be my protector. If he has power over food, he has power over nature. So the disciples did not understand the full implication of the miracle, of Jesus' divine nature, of Jesus' power, and also their hearts were hardened. Because they couldn't understand fully, their hearts are hardened. And he spoke to me. Am I sometimes like this? Either I don't understand God's way, or if I can understand, is my heart hardened? And because my heart is hardened, I don't appropriate and I don't appreciate the fullness of what God can do for us. So he can know that at the same time. Okay, let us go back to there. Go back to the word. Okay, verse 33 there. Then those who were in the boat worship him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Through this incident, the disciples, as well as some of the fishermen there, understood and recognized that truly Jesus is the Son of God, because they have seen with their own eyes, they experienced that Jesus not only was able to provide for them a provider, he was also the protector. The verse 34, when they had crossed over the land at Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
Lessons for us.
This one?
Premillennialism misunderstands the nature of the kingdom.
Which one you want?
Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. Jesus prayed without ceasing, so should we. 1 Thessalonians 5:17, Colossians 4:2. In merely passing by his disciples as they strained at rowing, Jesus shows us how much greater his divine power is than our feeble human efforts. Peter was not only rescued from the water, but from his pride and presumption and from his fear and doubt.
I think if we can just leave here. So these are some of the lessons that the author of this to prepare that he put. But what are some other lessons we can learn? Okay, firstly, I think from this miracle of Jesus walking on the water and his encounter with Peter, we recognize and we know that Jesus has power over nature. He is truly divine. Secondly, I think this passage also helped me to see that Jesus, in his mentoring and his discipling of his disciple and training of disciple, he gives space for a disciple to grow in faith. Okay, he could have gone into the boat with them and then travel across, but he chose to stay back and give time for the disciples to debrief among themselves. And he allowed the wind to come, the storm to come, to let the disciple experience how it is like to handle a storm without Jesus personally next to them in the boat. And it speaks to me even in our own effort, in our own exercise of discipling, whether as a parent or as a ministry leader, as a pastor. Do I intentionally give space for people that I want to disciple, space for them to grow, space for them to mature, instead of always holding them and always getting them out of every trouble or whatever? If I are children, do we step in at the first sign of trouble? Or do we let them grow, let them learn to handle problems on their own? Okay, of course, another lesson we could learn was during storm, just like Peter, do we take our eyes off Jesus? And instead of focusing on Jesus, focus on issues around us. This pandemic is a good example for us to be able to learn to focus on Jesus, and knowing that Jesus is the one. He can steal us in whatever situation, whatever storm we face in our life. Okay, I know the last part about healing, we may want to discuss. In these three passages, it seems to indicate that Jesus heals everyone that come to him. But we know even in scripture, not everyone is healed. And maybe Pastor might want to lead us, passing the bar, Pastor might want to lead us later in discussion on this issue. So thank you very much.